Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's lecture. So today we are going to finish up 7.1, and then I changed my mind about 7.2. I don't think I really want to go through that section. But what I would like to do is kind of give you an overview of the voting system that we use in our country, which is the Electoral College. Okay. I did mention it in the last video, but I never really detailed what exactly it is. And I think that's, obviously an important thing to know since that's how our elections work. Okay. Um, but first, before we go into that, let's finish up with 7.1. We have a couple more voting methods to talk about. Just as a reminder of the ones that we already talked about, we talked about majority rule, which is that the candidate receiving more than 50% of the vote is the winner. Okay. You can actually see a nice example of this that's topical with the 2020 election, which is that in Georgia, for their Senate seats, they have a rule where the candidate must get at least 50% of the vote. Okay, um, in a lot of states for the Senate and the House seats, it's just whoever has the most votes gets the seat. But in Georgia in particular, they have a rule where the candidate must receive 50%. Okay, so that's an example of majority rule. So let me just write that in here. Okay. And of course, with the 2020 election, we actually just saw that neither of the candidates for either of the candidates for neither of the House seats received 50% of the vote. So nobody is getting the seats as of right now, and they're going to have another election in January called the runoff election to determine who's going to get those seats. And we'll talk a little bit about a different kind of runoff election in a minute, but I'll explain that. So this example that we had is kind of like what happened there. In one of the seats, one of the candidates got like 35%, and then he had two getting about 25%. So nobody reached 50%. And then in the other election, one of them got like 49.8% or something like that, at least last time I checked. And the other one had like 47. So they were very close, but there's still that rule that you have to hit 50%. So they have to have another election. And then we talked about the preference ballot, where you have a ranked choice system, which we see a lot in things like sports awards. We don't really see that in our electoral system ever, though a lot of people do advocate for it. All right, and then we had the two different types with that, and then we talked about the fairness criterion, which is the majority criterion, the Condorcet criterion, monotonicity criterion, and independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. Okay. With our election system in the US, with the Electoral College system, which I'll talk about in a little bit, the majority criterion can very easily be violated. The independence of irrelevant alternatives, that can very easily be violated too with third parties, like meaning candidates that aren't a Republican or a Democrat. The other two usually aren't too much of an issue, though. Okay, so let's talk about these other two methods first. Okay, so this one, it has kind of a long name, the plurality. I can never spell plural right. Plurality with elimination method. And then it's sometimes referred to as sequential. I'll write that better. Sequential runoffs. Okay. So with this method, we eliminate the candidate with the least first place votes and redistribute those votes amongst the other candidates. And then we repeat until we have a winner. Okay. You should note winner here means they have the majority of the first place votes. Okay. Majority of the first place votes. So you do the ranked choice voting methods where you give like your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and so on. And if nobody has the majority of the first place votes, then what you do is you go through and you eliminate the person with the least first place votes and redistribute those. So whoever picked those as their first place, now you give their second choice the first place votes. Okay. So the runoff part of this, the sequential runoffs, the runoffs is in the sense that we're having another election. But in this case, you don't actually, nobody casts new votes. You just look at their second choice and take that as the new first choice. Okay. So this is different than like what I just mentioned with the Georgia runoffs. With the Georgia runoffs, they're going to have an entirely new election. So because nobody got 50% of the votes in that one, they're having what's called a runoff election, which is a whole separate election where people are going to come out and vote again there for whatever candidate they want to win the Senate. And they're just going to keep doing that until one of the candidates reaches 50% of the vote. Okay. So they're going to have entirely new elections. So let's look at how this would work with our previous example. Let me copy and paste our chart here. I have to write it all again. Okay. All right. So for this one, if we remember the results of last time, or no, we can just write again how many first place votes each got. Okay, so first place votes for S, M, and C. Okay, so Snickers had 9 first place votes, right? Miniatures has 4, right? Yeah. And which was this? Crunch has 5, right? So at this point you might think like, okay, Snickers has the majority of the votes, right? Because they have the most, but they don't actually have a majority. I guess they technically have exactly 50%. Is that right? There's 4, 5, so there's 18 votes total. So Snickers has 9 out of 18. So let's write that not as a fraction. 9 out of 18 first place votes, right? Which is 50%. But a majority is defined as more than 50%. Okay. So this technically is not a majority of the votes. Okay, so that's what we mean by majority, is that they have more than 50%. Here, Snickers has exactly half, which still leaves open the possibility, if you eliminate some of the first place votes of the other candies, that either Crunch or Miniatures can come in and get that other 50%, resulting in a tie. So that's why we don't just stop right here, and now we go ahead and eliminate the other first place votes. So So now for the runoff method, we go and we say, okay, who has the least amount of first place votes? And that's Miniatures here. Miniatures has the least amount of first place votes. So we just eliminate Miniatures altogether. We just get rid of them. Okay. And then we look at the new preference schedule. Okay, so we have number of votes. So now we're only going to have a first choice and a second choice, because we're only looking at Snickers and Crunch now, right? So we can keep all these columns the same, 3, 1, 4, 1, 9. You could maybe combine some of them now, but we won't bother. It's easier, just leave it like this. And then we just move everything up to replace the Miniatures. So the people who picked Crunch as their second choice, because Miniatures are gone, we just now assume that that's the first choice. Okay. So this would be C and S, because we're just moving everybody up. And this one is going to be S and C. This one is going to be C and S. So that's what I mean by, like, we could technically combine the first and third columns here, but it's not necessary. And then the last one is S and C. I copied the points here, you might have realized, but we don't actually need those anywhere for this, because we're no longer doing the point method, just called the Borda count system. So we don't need those anymore. So now we just look at a new chart where we have first place votes. Okay, and then we have Snickers and Crunch, and we look at what they have. So Snickers has 1 plus 9, which is 10. Crunch has 3 plus 4 plus 1, which is 8. And now we ask ourselves, okay, does anybody have a majority? And there's 18 votes. Snickers now has 10 out of 18 votes, which is going to be more than 50%. For an exact number, they have 55%. You can round to 56%. So Snickers has about 56% of the vote. So they have the majority. And thus win the election. Okay, so this is the sequential runoff method. Okay, so I don't know how commonly this is used. I mean, it's a valid voting method. I think a lot of the time when you have some sort of runoff election, instead of just bumping up the choices like we did here. A lot of times you just do a completely new vote. Because it's not really a fair assumption that these are going to translate perfectly, because now the situation is different, right? So you might make your choices a little bit differently. So a lot of times, to avoid problems like that, we just have an entirely new election. But what are some downsides of having an entirely new election? For example, in Georgia, where they're going to have an entirely new election, what are some downsides of that? Well, they're not going to have nearly as many people coming out to vote. I mean, that's just a fact, because more people come out to vote when there's a presidential election on the ballot. So because those people in Georgia, because in January they won't be voting for the president anymore, they're only going to be voting for the Senate. A lot of them aren't going to bother coming out to vote, because they don't really care about the Senate as much as they do about the presidency, right? So there's a lot of people just aren't even going to vote. So the numbers are going to be way different. So if you could do something like this, you would still have the same number of votes. So maybe it's a little more fair in that way. So there's pros and cons to both of these kinds of methods. I think a lot of the time in practice, we do just end up having a new election, though, rather than bumping up the choices. All right. So anyway, let's talk about the last method now. So this is called the method of pairwise comparisons. Okay. So this is like where we kind of have like a head-to-head matchup. Okay. So we compare each candidate to the other candidates in one-on-one matchups. We give the winner of each pairwise comparison a point. The candidate with the most points wins. Okay. So it's essentially like a tournament kind of matchup, right? Where you have people go on 1-to-1, and then you advance to the next round if you win, until you have like finals, right? It's a little bit different though, because instead of just having them advance to the next round, you just take the candidate and put them against every single person, and if they win, they get a point. Okay. So let's look at an example with our trusty set of votes here. Again, we don't need the points. These points are irrelevant for this method. Okay. So we do, okay, first matchup. Let me note that this is an example. So first matchup, it doesn't really matter which one you pick here as the first matchup. I'll just go with the one in the book though, which is M versus C. So the miniatures versus the crunch. Okay. So you're looking at, okay, how many people are preferring miniatures to crunch? Okay. I'll just write underneath right here. So we just look for, okay, where is miniatures above crunch? And that's going to be here, here, and here. Okay, so the 3 plus 1 plus 9, which is 13. And then the remainder would have crunch above them, which is 5. Okay. So clearly miniatures wins here. Okay. So let's do point totals. M, C, S. So we'll give a point to miniatures. We'll just use tally marks. And then we'll do our second matchup. Which is going to be M versus S. Okay. So where is miniatures beating Snickers? So that's going to be here, 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 and that's it. So 8. And then the remainder is going to go to Snickers for 10 because there's 18 total. And you got this column and this column. And I'm getting rid of these lines just so they're not there on the next one. So we have Snickers. So that's a point for Snickers. And now what's the last matchup we need? That's going to be Crunch versus Snickers, right? Those are the 3 possible combinations here. Third matchup is going to be Crunch versus Snickers. So where is Crunch preferred to Snickers? That's going to be here, here, here. So that's again going to be 8, meaning the remainder goes to Snickers. So Snickers gets the second point. So Snickers has 2 points, miniatures has 1, Crunch has 0. So Snickers wins the election. Okay. So this way it can be a little bit tricky to make sure you have all of the different matchups, right? Here we only had 3, so it wasn't too hard to count, but it can be tricky. Snickers winning is a good thing for our fairness criterion, right? Because we basically said the person who gets the most votes should win, which was Snickers in this choice, in this example. If we just do a recap here of all the different voting methods, Snickers wins the head-to-head matchup. Snickers won the sequential runoff method. And then a reminder for last time, it did not win the board account method. With the ranked choice system, the miniatures won. With the plurality method, Snickers did win because they got the most first place votes. And I think that's all we did with that example. So out of 3 of the 4 methods we looked at, Snickers did win. Okay. All right. So let's do a summary here. Okay. Of the methods and the fairness criterion. Okay. So the methods we've done are plural every time. Plurality, board account, sequential runoffs, and pairwise comparisons. Okay. And then we have our 4 fairness criterion, which was the majority, Condorcet, monotonicity, tonicity, and I'll just write independence. It was the independence of irrelevant alternatives. Okay. And let's try to determine, what the best method is out of these ones, okay, in terms of the fairness criterion. Remember, we had the theorem that said no possible voting method could satisfy all of these, right? So let's look at which one are satisfied. Well, the plurality method, remember, this is just you do your ranked choices, and then whoever gets the most first place votes wins. So that's going to satisfy the majority criterion, right? Because whoever gets the majority would definitely win in that scenario. It's not going to satisfy the Condorcet criterion. Just as a reminder of what that is, that was the one where in a head-to-head comparison, they're preferred that they should be the winner. Okay. In our example, the majority person did win the head-to-head matchup, but that's not necessarily the case. Okay. Okay. The monotonicity one, it will satisfy it. This is the one that in another election with the same situation, basically, that it the winner is still the winner of that one too, which basically means the results aren't random, right? But the irrelevant alternatives, that one's not going to be satisfied, because you can imagine if somebody gets the most votes, but you take away one of the candidates, then maybe the votes for that candidate goes to another person, and now that person has the most first place votes. So this one won't necessarily be satisfied. Okay. The board account method, I think, seems like the best method, but actually, if you go down the list here, it violates 3 out of the 4. The only one it doesn't violate is the monotonicity, meaning that in another election, the results will be the same. It definitely violates the majority. We saw that in the example where Snickers got the most first place votes, but the miniatures ended up winning. The Condorcet is also violated just from that same example, right? Miniatures won, but Snickers wins in a head-to-head matchup against everybody. And the independence of irrelevant alternatives, that one is just a big problem area, because it's just the same idea. If you take out like Crunch, for example, then maybe Snickers does end up winning. It can change the election drastically. In fact, this is just a problem in all of them. Okay. For any of these, when you remove some of the alternatives, it can change the election drastically. Let's look at the sequential runoff method again. This was the one where we eliminate the person with the least first place votes. Then these ones are all violated, but the majority should still stand. The person with the majority of the votes will still win in the sequential runoffs. Okay. Which we saw with Snickers getting the win in that one. And then lastly, with the pairwise comparisons, everything is satisfied except for the independence one. It's very hard to satisfy the independence one. But we saw Snickers win with the majority of the votes. The Condorcet should definitely be satisfied, right? Because that's about head-to-head matchups, and that's what pairwise comparisons is doing. And the monotonicity means in another election, it will be satisfied. The only one monotonicity is not satisfied in the sequential runoffs, because in the next election, you're doing another election, but now this there could be a different winner, right? So the summary here is just trying to show that there's no method that is supporting all of these criterion. If we were just going based on this, it looks like pairwise comparisons would be the best method, even though we don't normally see that one used too much. We kind of see it, like I said, in like tournaments, right? Like for sports games or something like that. It's not really we're not really voting there, but it's the same kind of idea. All right, so let's go ahead and look at let's this is a good summary of some of the voting methods that are out there. There's obviously going to be way more than this. There's tons of different voting methods. Let's go ahead and look at our voting method in the United States, so we can see like a more concrete example here. All right, so this is the heart of what we call the Electoral College system. So this information is in the book. I'm just kind of pulling this from some random sources here. Let's just give a quick summary of the system. Electoral College system. So just in my own words here, citizens of each state vote for their choice for president. Okay, so I should note this is only used for the presidency. It's not used for the Senate or anything like that. Citizens of each state vote for their choice for president. Whoever gets the most votes in that state receive all of that state's electoral college votes. Okay. And then whoever gets the most electoral college votes wins the election. Okay. So some things to address here. First of all, what even is the Electoral College, right? Well, the Electoral College, it's literally just an organization of people who are there to elect the presidency. So we vote for who we want to be the president in the election every 4 years, on the first Tuesday of November. But that just determines which way our state is going to vote. So, for example, with Texas, right, the Republicans usually win in Texas. So they determine, okay, more people in Texas want the Republican president. So then Texas takes all 38 of their electoral college votes and casts those in the actual presidential election, which is in December. Okay. So it's kind of like a winner take all system for the majority of states, where whoever whatever candidate gets the most votes, they get all of the electoral college votes. So it's like a winner take all, or sometimes people call it first past the post, with two exceptions. One is Nebraska and one is Maine. In Nebraska and Maine, so Nebraska, which is NE, and Maine, which is ME, split their votes proportionally. Okay. It's not exactly proportionally. Maine, for example, gives the majority of its votes to the winner of the state, and then only one of them, I believe, to the other candidate. So the numbers you see on this chart are how many electoral college votes each state gets, and it's based on the number of people they get in the House of Representatives, plus an extra 3 for DC. So in the House of Representatives, which is one of the there are 3 branches of the government, right? There's the judicial, executive, and the legislative branch. The legislative branch is composed of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Okay. The House of Representatives has 535 people. So the number of electoral college votes is that number plus another 3 for Washington, D.C., leaving us with a total of 538 total possible votes. Okay. So a candidate wins by getting the majority of the electoral college votes. So candidate, how many would that be? It would be 270. 270 votes to win. Okay. Now, our country basically has a two-party system at this point, meaning only Republicans or Democrats are typically getting electoral college votes. It's been a long time since another party got any votes. But if a candidate does not reach 270, or if it's a different number, because the number of votes has changed throughout history, then the House of Representatives would pick the next president instead. They would just pick. It doesn't even have to be the person who got the most votes. So the only way that could happen realistically in our scenario would be if both Biden and Trump in the 2020 election got 269 electoral college votes, exactly half. There would be no way. It's basically impossible at this point for a third-party candidate to get any electoral college votes. Like I said, it hasn't happened in a long time. So with only 2 parties, the only possible way is if they get exactly an even split at 269 apiece, which has never happened. It would be very hard for that to happen. So we pretty much just look for, okay, when does a candidate, whenever a candidate passes 270, we declare them the winner. Okay. So you can see the different amounts of electoral college votes each state gets. California has the most with 55, and that's because how many people, like I said, it's based on the House of Representatives, and how many people you have in the House of Representatives is based on the your population. I'm actually, what I said wasn't exactly true. It's based on the House of Representatives and the Senate. So you get an electoral college vote for every person you have in the House of Representatives plus your senators. But the difference is everybody has 2 senators. So, and everybody has at least 1 person in the House. So that's why the least amount of people you could have is 3. Okay. So California, for example, has 53 members in the House of Representatives and 2 senators, so they get a total of 55. And I believe DC does have the 2 senators plus 1 representative. So I think what I said earlier, I'm trying to remember what I said, but I don't think it was completely correct. But in total, there's 435 members of the House of Representatives, I believe, and then 100 senators. So then I guess the extra 3 would be from DC. I'm just going off of memory here, so but I believe that's what it is. So places like Montana and Wyoming and the Dakotas and Alaska, they only get 1 member of the House of Representatives, but everybody gets 2 senators no matter what. So even though if you were doing the population actually proportionally, Wyoming should have way less votes than somebody in California. And what actually happens is that a person's vote in Wyoming is actually way more powerful than a person's vote in California, oddly enough. In practice, it doesn't matter too much because Wyoming always votes for the Republican and California always votes for the Democrat. But still, if you actually look at the proportions, a person in Wyoming does have a more powerful vote than a person in California by a lot. California realistically should probably have even more votes. And in fact, whenever the redistricting is done every 10 years with the census, these numbers do change. So, for example, Arizona is expected to get some more electoral college votes, which means that in other states are going to have to go down because we're not changing that total number of 538. So we're just reproportioning them. So you can see over in Kentucky, we have 8 votes, right? I actually live in Indiana, so I guess I should say we have 11 votes, and over in Kentucky, you guys have 8 votes. Both of these are pretty much always red states, right? So that means that they're almost always all going to the Republicans. That 8 votes in Kentucky, that comes from the fact that there are 6 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators, right? Which right now are Mitch McConnell and what's that guy's name? Paul. I'm trying to remember his first name. But I don't remember his first name, but Rand Paul, right? Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul. So Kentucky as a whole usually goes for the Republican presidential candidate, but the people in the House of Representatives, they could often be Democrat. I think there might be 2 right now that are Democrat, which makes, a lot of people might think like, okay, well, Kentucky always goes red for the Republican candidate, so what's even the point of voting? Well, the point of voting is that you could still you could still have the Democrat win in the House of Representatives, right? Or the Republican, if that's what you would vote for. So it's not the president is almost guaranteed to be the Republican for Kentucky every time, but all the House seats and even the Senate seats aren't necessarily. Or we can see with the governor, right? A Democratic governor was elected. And the House and Senate are arguably even more important than the presidency because that's where the laws are actually made. The president, as a whole, really has very little power compared to the other branches of government in terms of things that like really affect our everyday life, right? So it's very important to vote for those House of Representative seats and the Senate seat. Like I said, a lot of states are really they tend to lean one way or the other. Either they're always Democrat or always Republican. Like California, Oregon, and Washington, almost always Democrat. Same with a lot of the Northeast states like New York. But then there's a lot of states which we call swing states, which it's kind of unpredictable which way they're going to go. Those are typically Ohio, Florida. This year it was Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and there was even some talk about Texas, though it did end up going red anyway. Those are typically referred to as the swing states, and those are where the presidential candidates typically spend their most time campaigning because the other ones are usually pretty much predetermined, so you're just looking at those swing states, especially Florida because there's so many votes in Florida. Okay. So I think that's pretty much all there is to say about it. They focus on winning states rather than winning votes as a whole. So that's why it's very easy for a candidate to get less votes, but still win the election as a whole. In 2016, Trump lost the popular vote, meaning the total number of votes, by about 3 million. He got about 3 million votes less overall, but it didn't matter because a lot of those votes he lost by came from California, and they're capped at 55 total votes. So it doesn't matter if he loses by 1 vote or 5 million votes in California. He's still only getting, or the Democrat would only be getting 55 of those votes. So um, he won more states overall, and thus he won the election while not winning the popular vote. It happened back in 2000 also, where George Bush, he won the presidency, but he lost the popular vote. Al Gore that year did get more votes overall. That was a very close election. It all came down to Florida, basically. In general, a lot of the time, the person who wins the popular vote does win the election overall. Like in 2008 and 2012, Obama won the popular vote and won the Electoral College vote. But in general, the popular vote really doesn't even matter. It's just whoever wins the Electoral College that's elected the president. Okay. So that's why you're never going to see a lot of people campaigning out in California. A lot of presidents, like Trump, probably barely went to California because Biden was almost guaranteed to win there. They spend their time in Florida and Ohio and Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those states. Okay. All right. So, yeah, that's it for today. So let me know if you have any questions about this system or about any of the voting systems we talked about. And then next time we're going to get started on chapter 3, which is dealing with probability. So thank you for watching today, and I'll see you then.